Hello and welcome. Today I want to talk about the Orthodox Church in America. In fact, I want to give you a warning about the Orthodox Church in America. If you don't know, the Orthodox Church in America is a jurisdiction of the Orthodox Church proper, and it operates in the Americas. It has dioceses in Canada and the U.S., as well as parts, I believe, in South America. Today I want to talk about two issues that I think will concern you. One being that if you speak to a priest in what you would consider a private or semi-private and confidential setting, that doesn't stop priests from taking your words, misconstruing them. And the archdiocese, the main archdiocese in New York, doesn't really take that seriously. They'll say they do, but they don't actually investigate or anything like that. And then if you are going to a parish for any number of years, you can still be banned from your parish, basically for your life, without ever doing anything, without being accused of anything, which is more alarming to me. And during this video, I also will talk about some of the processes you might find trying to deal with this within the channels of the church. That's what I'm going to talk about. I'll also, at the end, I might give a little bit of information as well that kind of pertains more generally, but yeah. So before I talk about those things, I want to go back and say a few things about myself and about the situation. I'm not speaking about myself. I was kicked out and I was given reasons. What those reasons are, I will share. I'm not going to hide it. And, but I didn't want to talk about myself and my situation because, and I'm not going to try and defend myself. I'm not saying I did anything wrong, but anyway, I want to talk about people that you would hear and listen to that you would say they did nothing. They weren't even accused of anything. For someone like myself, you might think that the accusations are real. They're true. They're valid. There was a reason for me to be banned from a parish. And, you know, that's totally fair. If I say that I wasn't guilty of something, you can not believe me. And I think in our current climate, you really shouldn't just listen to anyone and believe them just as is. And that's why I want to talk about people that are just generally, you would never consider having done anything wrong. And the New York Syosset actually agrees that some of the people the people that I'm speaking about were booted without having done anything wrong. Okay, I'm also going to talk about, well, what I'm going to talk about is primarily facts. I want to share that almost everything I will say has been written down, either in email or in a physical document sent to us. There will be a few times I will refer to, there's one time I'll refer to a phone call with the bishop, and that'll be with two different people at two different times, agreeing on the same point. And I will also refer to at least one time where a priest, the dean of the region, actually spoke to about 20 people, 20 adults. And so I that's probably the only things that I'll say, other than I might give some anecdotal details, and those will be obvious, and those will be details that I have personally witnessed, or I will say otherwise. But I'm going to try and rely on just basically facts that you can go from. So, what I'm also going to talk about, and I want to be clear, is I'm going to talk about 3 different particular times at least. I'm going to talk about a time where priests met with people in the parish. But I'm going to speak about in that particular moment where they sent out a document explaining how they met with people in the parish and what they believe is true. And then also a document that was sent from the archdiocese to people like myself. And then thirdly, I will talk about a document that was sent to us from the archdiocese in New York with Alexander Rental, and speaking on behalf of the Synod of Bishops and the Metropolitan or Primate, or whatever you want to call him, Tikhon. I'm purposely not being respectful with their titles, because I don't really believe they deserve any honorifics. And I think that's it. Anyway, I'm trying to make this short, and yeah. So I need to talk a little bit about my own situation first, because it pertains through the whole conversation. It pertains, because what they really wanted was, I think, to kick some people out. And you need to know the process behind that in order to go forward. You can believe that, as I said, you can believe I didn't, that I deserved it, and that's fine, whatever. But so at 9:40 at night, we were texted and sent an email with a document attached to it. And we were expected to sign that document, to agree to sign that document by 12 noon the following day. So just over 14 hours, starting at 10 o'clock at night, they expected us to sign a document. The document, if we agreed to it, would last for our entire ecclesiastical life in the church. And it took away any possibility of any appeals, and it said that if I went in contradiction to what the priest wanted, that I could be, and other people could be, excommunicated with the blessing of the bishop at any time. And so we didn't sign it. Now, the accusations we had, and that's important too, but these are the accusations we were given. First, you have been unwilling to follow the rector's leadership. And 2, you have focused on your self-interest instead of Jesus Christ, as shown through your behavior and your words. Now, I wish I could say that they gave examples, but they did not. They said they did over 100 hours of examination and research into this. And so I find it interesting when I emailed back to them or texted back to them, I asked them for more clarification and more time, because, those are very vague comments. There's no detail at all. I didn't know what they were talking about. And they said minimal clarification would be given, and that they were in a time crunch. So no time extension, and that we needed to sign the document as is. And yeah, so that's pretty vague, to basically say that the priest now can excommunicate you at any point. That sounds more like, he has a disagreement with you, you're gone. and the bishop is blessing it, and you have no appeal. And so I don't think that's cool, but maybe you do. Some people in the parish thought it was okay enough to stay, and I don't know if they're just living in the world that they think it won't happen to them, but, you know. So that's the background. And I think that's all I want to say there. So speaking about what happened, 3 people met with, at a particular time, 3 people, friends, met with 2 priests at the parish, and it was what I would consider a private conversation among 3 friends in a small, no one else was there. No one else was, I think, allowed to be there. And they had a conversation. And during that conversation, one of the people said something to the priest, one of the priests, probably both of the priests. And what the priests ended up doing is, in their report they sent out, they didn't list names. They were very sneaky with how they used all their names, didn't use any names, try and get around, I think, legal issues. But we're a small community, and basically everyone knows each other. Most people had been in the parish for over 10 years. So, yeah, so they wrote in their report to the parish as well, and it went more than to the parish, so I don't consider it a private document. It said what this person had said, but it had misconstrued it to actually attack people this person knew quite well in the community. And the people knew immediately that it was directed at them, and other people knew that it was directed at them and myself. And that wasn't this person's intention. And so what you need to know as well, because, I'm sorry, I'm not organized. One of the priests was had been a professional counselor for 30 years at the time. And the other person had been a child protection worker for roughly 18 years. So between them, they had about 50, almost 50 years of experience in a setting where I believe professionally they're expected to not take things that are confidential and say them publicly, and certainly to get consent. Consent is a big one, and consent was not given. And, that's bad enough, but what I'm more concerned about is how the church proper, the authorities back in Syosset looked at this and thought, oh, well, you haven't given us enough information. We're not going to, what do they want? An affidavit from the person? That could be provided if they wanted, because, the person who had this happen to them hates the church now, is an atheist. And I believe, I don't know much about whether they've had counseling. I don't know what, but it was very traumatic for this person. That's all I can say. And I can't give any more information because, this situation was bad enough to hurt someone. And because of the background of the 2 priests, I can only think it was intentional. Because one of the things I haven't mentioned yet, and I meant to, was during the course of the entire time until now, there have been no apologies. None. There was one apology by the presiding bishop RNA in Canada by the dean, but the bishop retracted that, and it certainly was never made public. It was only said to a private group of 20 people. So I don't know if that constitutes an apology in anyone's mind, but there doesn't seem to be any movement or thought that anything I'm going to describe today is bad, was wrong in any way. So, yeah, the OCA doesn't seem to take seriously claims when priests clearly take words and misconstrue them and say them in a document that goes out to, at minimum, a large number of people that this person knew very well. And also, I believe publicly, because it went to, priests and some other and parish members in other parishes. And yeah, so I don't consider it a private document. I consider it public. But they were sneaky, and they didn't use the names of the people. But we're a small enough community as well that, everybody kind of knows everyone. When they brought out their document, when they brought out their report saying that people had been booted from the parish, they didn't mention names, as I said, but yet people knew at least some of the people involved, because there had been some public and semi-public issues that I hadn't been involved in at all. But anyway, so there's that. You can take it for what it's worth, but if you're dealing with a trouble, maybe in your marriage, maybe in some relationship with someone else that is semi questionable ethically or something, who knows if the priest will take that and run with it in something public, and then the archdiocese doesn't seem to care. They just look the other way. And, Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain himself even talked about how at a time a little earlier, a priest had been notorious for having done something of this kind of thing. He had taken, in the confession, he had taken some statement and then said it publicly, and that was a big problem. And the idea was, and it's pretty common sense, that if you allow these kinds of behaviors to happen in the clergy, then ultimately no one trusts the clergy to talk to them. So the next point I want to talk about is how people were kicked out of the parish for no reason. Literally, I could say that I was kicked out for no reason, but, I was at least accused of something. I mean by that people were not even accused. They just literally got, they were told by someone else getting an email, namely their spouses, were given an email. And they were told that they were banned from the parish. Now, there's a number of things to say about this, but first off, this is just, I think this is wrong in so many levels. So, I think it's this. So, this action had been chosen because it was a more merciful act. And it's been chosen because it was a more merciful act. That's what Alexander Rental, I believe, wrote, speaking about how they decided to do this action instead of excommunication. But I don't understand that, because, let's suppose I did some heinous thing and I was excommunicated. I mean, for example, let's suppose that I aborted a child. Obviously, I'm a man, so that can't happen, but let's suppose I did. Well, that is considered, according to the canons, an excommunicatable offense, and you're given a certain period of time. Well, according to excommunication, you know, the person tells you what you've done wrong, and you're given a period of time, and then you can come back. And during that time, you're supposed to work through what you've done, and being told what you've done also gives you hope to be restored when you have worked through what you've done. And in this instance, I myself was not really told what I did. Remember, these are the two accusations I was given. You have been unwilling to follow the rector's leadership, and you have focused on your self-interest. And when I asked for examples, as I believe I mentioned, they said no minimal clarification would be given, and they didn't give any. The only clarification they gave was an email called clarification, which said that this, whatever this is being done in love. That was their clarification. So no clarification for myself, but for people who weren't even accused, this was also being applied to. So how is it a merciful act if you're essentially banning someone for something that someone else did? If I did something that was bad enough to be excommunicated, well, you don't end up excommunicating also the spouse. You don't. In no instance, I believe, canonically, that's the case. But the Orthodox Church in America believes that excommunicating, essentially, it's more merciful to ban people who have done nothing wrong than it is to merely excommunicate someone and tell them what they did. Think on that, right? That's just wrong on so many levels. The problem of allowing this gives the clergy a power that I don't think they should have. And I know they're supposed to be despots. They're supposed to be good despots. I mean, Jesus Christ is considered to be the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, Melech HaMelechim. In that sense, he is a despot, but he's a good one. I don't see that same image in these bishops, but, that's my personal opinion. So I think this is a second point that they made. Abstention was applied to parishioners, namely spouses, who themselves had not engaged in any problematic behavior, is true. That being said, it is not something so grievous. So they admit that people were being banned without having done anything, without even being accused of anything. I mean, he assumes that I did something bad, and that's fine. But, tell me what it is. I actually think it still should be canonical that when you're excommunicated or you're given a discipline, you're told what to do. I would have thought that'd be in the canons of the church, but at least according to the canon law professor, Alexander Rental, it is not. You don't need to tell people what they've done wrong. So there we are. That's the Orthodox Church in America. Now, it's also, I think this was a point too. Okay. So then, what I want to mention, because this also has to do with the people being kicked out, his beatitude, whatever, Tikhon, found no conclusive evidence that there was any libel, coercion, divisiveness, or willful deception. Well, I don't know about you, but, and I'm not going to talk about the last two, but I want to talk about libel. Libel, they didn't use names, and so, all things being equal, I can understand how they might not think it was libel or libelous. because without names, there is not an explicit declaration that someone said something about someone. That being said, it was a small community. A lot of people basically knew without being told who was on the naughty list, if you will. And so I can understand why they would think it's not libel, because they might be taking a certain minimalistic approach. But I do think that there was something there that was questionable. But in terms of coercion, saying that it was acceptable, because I gave them proof that they gave vague accusations, and they expected people to sign a document where they were restricted from a whole bunch of behavior in the church. Given 14 hours starting at 10 o'clock at night, well, I consider that coercion. I consider it coercion that if you sign the document, you can no longer appeal, and that you can be excommunicated at any point with the blessing of the bishop. And because there's such vague accusations included in that basically almost anything that falls under those two, general accusations of, you're following your self-interest instead of Jesus Christ, or you're not listening to the parish priest. Well, the first one sounds almost cultic, You don't believe what the priest is saying about something theologically. You don't agree with how he's treating people. You're gone, right? And more on that in a little bit. I'll explain some of the things I've seen in the church that I had issues with, and why I think behind the scenes, I think that was one of the reasons why they wanted us gone. But in terms of coercion, that really, I think, also leads to a bad place for clergy, because it's then saying that they can be coercive. You can be coerced like this by clergy, and it's not a big deal. They'll look the other way. Because, I gave them enough information to say that. And obviously on another side, I think often coercion is applied, at least in a legal sense, with only two primary focuses. It's either monetary or your life. You coerce someone, I'm gonna harm you physically or something. And those two were not the case. They just barred us from a church. And in a certain way, good riddance, because, who wants to be in a place like this? And when I tell you some of the examples of what I've seen in this church, I should have jumped ship a while ago. It's some of the stuff's pretty crazy. So anyway, I think that there's a lot of weirdness with this, but they think it's perfectly acceptable to boot people out of a parish for basically no reason. And that's more merciful than to actually tell someone what they did wrong and excommunicate them for a time. So next, let's see what this is. Yeah. Yeah, and this just reinforces what I was saying. They applied this kind of excommunication instead of repentance and reconciliation. We're supposed to get you apply this instead of excommunication. I'll leave that up for a little bit longer. I think I've basically covered this, but basically, instead of excommunication, they did this. Because it's temporary in nature, and then it's removed in the face of repentance and confession and reconciliation. Well, there's a lot of BS there, and I don't believe it at all. I'm a little tired. I'm going to have that up just so I can say it. So part of the problem is that it's not temporary. They said it was temporary, but it's not. This was applied originally at one time, and they said you could appeal this process in 6 months' time. Well, it turns out that about 3 or so months after the initial decision had been made, the priests and the bishop got together, and they decided, without speaking to anyone, that this was going to be extended indefinitely. And to this day, around almost, I guess, 4 years now, 3 years, 4 years, 4 years, almost 4 years now, there's no movement and there's no desire for reconciliation by the priest. Now, I don't want to go back, and I don't know who does, but I do know that at least one person, a very good man, believes in reconciliation and believes this at least is something that needs to be resolved, and he's been trying to work with it, and there's no movement, there's no intention of anything. So that's on the people, that's on everyone, including people who are not even accused of something. So, you know, in the face of repentance and reconciliation, so now you're saying that canonically, Mr. Canon Professor, that someone can be given a discipline without any reasons, and it depends on the repentance and reconciliation of someone else. And the reconciliation is not even allowed in the time that they first gave, but it's changed without speaking to the people involved. So, yeah, that statement, I'll just put it up one more time, is BS. I don't believe them. So, and one of the reasons why I think they wanted the wives gone, or the spouses gone, is the following. This was in the report that they sent to the parish. Parishioners who were booted were given the opportunity to acknowledge that these behaviors had caused harm, were not acceptable, and agreed not to continue them going forward. Now, you'll have to believe me. I'm not going to put up, I don't know if I can put up the document. I'm sorry, I'm not technically that way. But I've shown you what I was accused of. And I asked for more information, and they said minimal clarification would be given, and nothing was given. So when they say that parishioners who were booted were given the opportunity to acknowledge that these behaviors had caused harm, is a lie. It's just flatly a lie. And Syosset and them know it, and they don't care. This is not something that apparently is something you hold to account priests. We were not given the opportunity to acknowledge our behaviors had caused harm because we weren't told what our behaviors were. Right? We didn't agree to continue them going forward because we didn't know what they were. There's nothing in that is true. You know, and even more so, the people who were booted, well, 2 people were booted. They said 4 parishioners were booted. 6 people were booted. So they lied in that part too in the document, saying that 4 people were booted when 6 people were booted. And meaning that people such as the spouses had the opportunity to acknowledge these behaviors and agreed not to do them and decided they wouldn't agree to do them. So that could be you. That could literally be you. You could be married to someone who disagrees with the priest, and how he's treating some people in the community, or something on politics, something about health, some issue, whatever it is, and the priest takes it upon himself to get involved, or people get involved to try and resolve this well, and this is the result, is that you could be kicked out of your parish, and the community could be told this, and others outside of the community. And here's another thing that they wrote in that same document. So not only did they tell the community that we were told what we had done wrong and decided we wouldn't do it, but they said not to become involved in these private matters. It can create confusion, gossip, and misunderstanding, right? What kind of understanding do they really want? They want you to understand their understanding, not the truth. And that's where I'm really bothered by, is just the misapplication of their role in a community. They're supposed to be, depending on who you speak to or read, they're supposed to be an image of Christ in the community. So what are you going to see if you want to deal with this issue? Well, Paul in 1 Corinthians tells you to approach the church leaders and to try and resolve it that way. And that's what we did. We decided not to sue them. Well, the first thing that you'll hear from them is that this is a local issue. And I don't believe that for a second. And that's why I believe this is something that is important for everyone. And it's not just about this particular situation with a particular small number of people in a small community in small town in Canada. This is something that the Arch-Chancellery Office and the Metropolitan and his Synod of Bishops all think is acceptable behavior, and they called it. I've shown you what I've shown you and their responses, and by them saying that it's a local issue, they don't have to actually do anything themselves. They just leave it to the bishop and his priests. The problem is that optically this is not a local issue, and here's why. On the lowest level, a local issue is something that just a priest does, right? And this particular priest was not involved. At least on paper, he wasn't involved. I think generally it's normal that priests are always, of the parish, are always involved in this kind of process, but I don't know. I can't speak on that. But then the next place, and this is according to their own legal statutes, their own defining elements of their church, the statutes say that local issues are dealt with by deans of the region and not by someone else. Well, the dean of the region didn't know about this. It's important to know that in the formal, I think the formal report, but certainly the letters from the chancellor himself stated that the dean was involved in this process. So someone is not telling the truth. You can't be very definitive of someone being involved in a process, being spoken to at length about research and about what's going on with these people, and then report it, and yet the person say they're not involved. So anyway, the dean was not involved. And I know this because when he met with a group of 20 people in the parish, he said as much. He said that by the time he found out about this situation, The whole decision had been made and everything had gone forward, which is completely in contrast to what the chancellor himself wrote. And it's important too that when the dean noticed that I was involved, I was one of the people, he was surprised. He didn't know I was involved. So that's just one other example of how I don't believe the narrative. You can believe who you want, you know, whatever. But anyway, so the person who did deal with it, not the dean, but it was the chancellor who deals with archdiocese issues. And just a second, just a moment, diocese and archdiocese is kind of confusing. In Canada, at least, it's an archdiocese. I don't know why. But there's an archdiocese in New York, and there's an archdiocese in Canada, and the Canadian archdiocese reports to the one in the States. So that's why I try to be very clear about, when I say archdiocese, I try to also say the priest who's behind it. And that'd be Philip Erickson is the chancellor in Canada. So he sent out 2 priests that he knew personally to the parish in Victoria, and then they reported back to him, and he and apparently the bishop was involved. According to him, the bishop was involved. And they made the decision to kick out these people. But the problem doesn't stop there, because the chancellor wrote to us on archdiocese letterhead. It's not on a normal paper, it's an archdiocese letterhead, meaning that it's not, he's speaking on behalf of, as a chancellor, not as a priest in any kind of local capacity. And it came with the blessing of the bishop signed on it. And to just note that the bishop has not rescinded this statement. He's not disagreed with it publicly. Privately, in 2 separate phone calls, he said that he had nothing to do with this, that Philip Erickson had just gone on his own and done this whole thing. And that for him, it was a local matter. It was just basically, and he said that the people there just don't want us. So, you know, it's now, I guess, a popularity contest to be in a church. And I do find it interesting. I mean, he doesn't really speak to a lot of people when he's there. I would think he speaks to, if he's speaking to anyone other than the priest and getting his information from anyone other than the priest, it'd be from, I think, 2 people. So, you know, the ability for politics to enter into this is pretty high. And the desire to kick people out without reasons is not really a healthy look for the OCA. And that's why I once again say, you can go, you can trust them, but I don't. Because what they'll do is they'll say it's a local issue, and you'll find that each person is saying a different thing, you know. The dean said he had nothing to do with this. The dean was surprised that I was involved. The chancellor says that they've done over 100 hours of investigation, and that they've spoken to the dean and the bishop. The bishop said he wasn't spoken to. The dean says he wasn't spoken to. We have, you know, it just goes on. It's just a big circle, and I can't say any one person is lying. I can't. But I can certainly say that there's a lot of misinformation. So now I want to talk a little bit about what I've seen in this communion. And also why I think this has import into why, you might have an issue with the priest or some people in the archdiocese, and they could just kick you out instead of dealing with the issue. So let me start by saying that I was serving in the altar. I was serving and I was helping bring communion to people. And one time a man was accused of not coming to church early enough. He was 80 years old. He could barely walk because he had broken both his hips the year before. He took 2 hours from getting out of bed to getting out the door. And when he walked down, and that was normally expected of him to walk to get communion, he'd be walking like this while a man was on each arm holding him and supporting him. And he was accused of not coming to church in a public manner. He was accused of not coming to church early enough. I seen, I guess a very good friend of mine wanted was asked when he was leaving one country, when he was leaving the States, and he wanted to move. A particular bishop wanted to make him a subdeacon, and he was like, well, that's up to you. You can do it if you want. And the priest that he was of the place he was moving to was saying, no, I don't want you to. And but the bishop on the other side was very much insistent, and so it went up the ladder to Irene. And apparently, according to this priest, Irene had said, no, you're not to be made a deacon, a subdeacon. I don't want that. I'm not blessing that. And yet, when my friend was speaking to the bishop, he actually takes out his phone and shows him the email from Irene that says, it's your archdiocese, it's your diocese, you can do what you want. So, I don't know if the priest was lying, or the Irene had said something different to the priest from what he said in the email, or changed his mind. I'm not gonna judge that, but I certainly would call it lying somewhere along the line. I would call it lying. And I've seen quite a few instances of that and worse. I've seen a lot of favoritism. A young woman who was dealing with, who was not very well off. She had a pay-to-use phone, and she was going through a custody battle with her boyfriend. And it was really ugly, custody over her child. And it got really ugly, and instead of helping this person, the priest just continued to just berate this person and put them down until they left. And then a new priest came, and I finally, because I was friends with this person, not very close friends, but I was friends, and I encouraged her that, this new priest would be different and better, and I finally, after speaking to her several times, she was willing to speak to this priest. But he had to phone her, and the priest had, I mentioned this to the priest, and he goes, no, I'm not phoning. She can phone me. And remember, she has a pay-to-use phone. She's poor. And the priest had no intention of ever changing his phone number or his place of location, which was long distance to her. So it would have been expensive for her to phone, so she didn't phone. It's also important to know that the priest I'm mentioning now thinks that reaching out to people is ego chasing, and that the parable of the Good Shepherd, you know, where you leave the 99 and you go to the one. Well, that's much overused in the church. And that statements are scriptures, such as the oft-beloved scripture verse for Protestants, you know, John 3:16, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life," or eternal life. Well, that's apparently just a logical statement. There's nothing to convey any emotion. There's nothing to convey anything that he really loved people or the world. He just loves. That's just the statement. So there's that. Yeah, I could keep going. There's a lot of really strange and weird things that just don't seem good. So one of the two priests who was speaking at the church on the Sunday when they were doing their study of the church, one of them went downstairs and he made a big diagram on a piece of paper that was basically modified Maslow's hierarchy. And I don't remember, I should have taken a picture because I was very bothered that God was not at the top. And he even talked about how God was not as important as family. And I thought that was quite weird that a priest, an Orthodox priest, would say that God should not be the most important in your life. And that was reaffirmed by the other priest who was telling some of the people who were removed that you should stop going to church. You should go to church only a little bit, only every so often for quite a while. Apparently, we took church too seriously. I don't consider myself a religious fanatic, and I don't think the people around me do either, but according to them, I took church too seriously, and I needed to see that God was not so important in my life, and that I should not be going to church all the time. So, I don't know. I'm just going to leave it at that for those details, but I thought those were important to note. I also want to make a small comment about the people involved in this decision-making process. Okay, so the chancellor, the church had 3 priests, one who seated it, and then another priest, and then a new priest. I think that's the number. Anyway, the intermediate priest had been there for 6 years, roughly. And before that, he had been presiding over a church, the same church that the chancellor now presides over. And one of the 2 priests who, and the new priest actually became Orthodox, I believe, in the parish that the old priest was involved, was taken care of, as well as he then was a secondary auxiliary priest in the chancellor's parish. Also, one of the 2 priests that came over to look over this situation, he was attached to the altar in the parish for the chancellor. And the other priest that came over was, I believe, a friend. He certainly was asked, he was a reader at the time, and he actually got a phone call from the chancellor to ask him if he wanted to become a priest. So there's a lot of relationships there. And then at the end of this process, when we finalized our process with the archdiocese in New York, someone looked a day or two after maybe a day or two before, they looked at the website for the Chancellery office, and lo and behold, the priest that was presiding over us when we were booted is now working for the Chancellery, and, call it what you will. And including with that, there was an interesting group of statements in the official report that they sent to the parish that went further than the parish. And it basically said that the priest, the initial priest, had been doing some really bad things liturgically. They neglected to mention it was under a different bishop and was blessed as such. They neglected to say that the priest who had been there for 6 years had not done anything different. So they covered over, the other priest, one of their friends. Yeah. And then, surprise to myself, when I visited the Chancellor's parish, they were actually doing some of the liturgical things, at least one of the liturgical things that we apparently shouldn't have been doing in the one that I was at, and we stopped doing it, but yet it still needed to be reported. So it's very strange. So I want to leave it at that. I'll just say that I hope you find this well, and I hope you are in a good parish. And I don't think that all priests are bad, and I don't think all bishops are bad, and I don't think that all priests or bishops say everything right all the time. I think we all make mistakes. We all have room for improvement. We all can take responsibility for ourselves, or should, but so wrapping this up, I think I just want to make a small statement about reconciliation, because it's an important theme that I wanted to talk about, but there's just so much to talk about, and I didn't get to it. But it's an important theme in the church, and you see that in the whole drama that unfolds in the story of Adam and Eve from the beginning. And much of this, according to some of the ancient traditions of the church, at least like Ephraim the Syrian, you'll see that drama of restoring Adam and Eve, mankind, to God, is an essential component of church, of Christianity. And you see this in the image of the icon of the anastasis, where Christ himself is picking out from the grave Adam and Eve by their wrists. And it's by their wrists, if you don't know, because it's not by their own power, but it's by Christ. And it's just an important role, I think, for the church, reconciliation. I didn't think this would be really a hard sell, but apparently it is, because, this process started about 4 years ago. And it was finalized with the archdiocese in New York about a year ago, just in August of 2021, I think. Anyway, it's been a little over a year. And so I don't see any movement on reconciliation. It certainly hadn't happened in the slightest by the time it was resolved with the administration, and it certainly hasn't moved at all since. And I'd like to say, just as a passing note, 4 people were, according to their document, 4 people were banned. But in reality, 6 people were banned formally. And then, at least under the radar, all those children to these families were banned, because, you're not going to have a child go to a church on their own. So they're literally have been ripped out from their community that they've grown up in for Christianity. And it's had devastating effects on many of them. And that's 11 people. And then after that, you've got all the people who were really upset about what happened and stopped going to church for a time. And now you're looking at dozens. And those people, after about, I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 months, they had their memberships all revoked, including a woman who was asked to be on parish council just a few weeks before, and then all of a sudden she's told that her membership is revoked, both her and her husband. And they felt like they had been similarly targeted. Obviously not in the same exact way, but they felt targeted. They felt set aside by the church. And these reports and the language, I don't think is ever going to reflect that. And my heart goes out to those people because they didn't deserve it either. So, I mean, what type of people do this, you might ask? I just want to raise this as a point. St. Basil the Great and St. John Chrysostom both mention how it's somewhat unheard of, but for people to do this, they're literally participating like those who handed over Jesus without evidence to judgment, who handed over Paul for judgment without evidence. It's those people, according to those saintly men, who participate in these kind of acts. And I'll leave it for you to judge whether or not these men deserve that appellation. But so to conclude, so to bring it all together, right? Like, if you're going to a parish and it's OCA, things can happen like any other parish, but if you say something to the parish priest and it gets leaked out by him, either intentionally or unintentionally, but especially even intentionally, the administration may not have a vigorous desire, a zealous desire to actually look into that. If you're married to someone who just has a disagreement with the priest, doesn't like how the priest is treating people in the parish, doesn't like politics, doesn't like, whatever, you could be kicked out because of your husband or wife. And that would be on them. And, I've said that we were accused and, maybe we were guilty. That's up to you to decide as well. I'm not gonna, as I said, I'm not defending myself, but the vague accusations are sketchy when you consider that they said they had 100 hours of investigation and they couldn't provide any examples when I asked for it. And that brings me to, the following points. So, I mean, it's better canonically to ban people for doing nothing wrong than it is to actually discipline or excommunicate someone for doing something that they think is allegedly wrong. But yet, and tell them that's actually not something they plan to do. It's better to actually just remove all people and not tell anyone anything. And that's canonically acceptable. And it's also not coercion to give people 14 hours to decide on whether or not to act on a document that has that can excommunicate them if they do anything wrong in the future and they've written off any appeals. And the allegations are vague. It's just that's not coercion according to the OCA. And, I think it is, but, maybe you don't. So that's kind of some of the topics I talked about. And I think I want to leave it at that. I just want people to hear this, and if you're in a place where your community isn't really healthy and things could really go wrong with a priest, just at least be on your guard, especially if you're in an OCA parish. At least if you're on your guard, you know what could be coming. And maybe if things are really bad, maybe it's time to really just rethink where you're going and what kind of priorities you have for you and your family. Because it's, the children, many of the children have just like lost their faith and just have no belief in the church. And to me, that's really terrible. And anyway, I don't want to leave on a bad note, but anyway, take care and God bless. Thank you.